Hello, everyone. Every so often, there is a nifty little changeover that happens. People go from one chapter of their lives into another, and I would say that I've always had the belief that life is a constant growing process. And with that growing process comes significance in so much that you sort of move on, you go through your day-to-day and progress on and travel through your life. You meet new people. Thank you, Seth, for hosting my stream with one viewer. You go for your day-to-day, meeting new people, garnering new experiences, doing all this cool new stuff, and then sometimes you never take the moment to sit back and pause and think, wow, look at how far we've come in our journey from square one to where we are now. But I think that it's truly something spectacular when something happens that really is able to just give you pause and reflection and make you think, wow, look at how much things have grown in the past, and look at the growth that has happened from being so, unsure of everything and not knowing what you're doing into being in a more exciting place of, one might say, even sleek professionalism, if such a thing is possible. And it is possible, and people engage in that all the time. All this to say that, y'all, I have something incredibly, spectacularly wonderful to reveal to all of you right now. It's me! Oh, wait, I need to do this. It's me! That didn't go the way I was expecting it to go, but oh well. Yeah, look at this, everyone. Look at this amazingness. That's right. I now have a talk sprite. I'm now officially a cartoon. And isn't that superb and fantabulous? It's truly wonderful what can happen when you decide to just become full-blown cartoon. I believe it was Paul Simon who said he didn't want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard. Absolutely nonsensical. Why wouldn't you want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard? Look how fun and cool it is to be cartoon. Hello, Ace, and hello, Violet. I'm sorry. Hello, Violet, and hello, Seth. How are things going? Force of habit. Anyway, yeah, it's amazing. It's cool, and it's wonderful, and it's fantabulous, and I can't believe it. Oh, my goodness. Just a simple cartoon. Indeed. And not only well, first things first, before I continue on with the more reveals I have here for you all, I need to first give credit where credit's due to the wonderful artist who drew this fantastic talk sprite for for I most certainly do not have the artistic skill and supremacy to pull off illustrations such as this. No, this was done by one Ruby Funky, who you can follow at twitch.tv/RubyFunky, and I believe you can also follow it on Twitter at the same handle. And yes, Ruby did indeed draw for me this talk sprite, and it did a fantastic job, and I'm most appreciative and grateful for its hard work and efforts. It came out looking superb and wonderful, and I've spent I'm not even joking with any of you when I say that I've spent the past week just absolutely vibrating in anticipation for this stream where I could reveal this, because this wasn't finished until after the stream I did on Monday, and I didn't stream on Thursday, and so I was like, well, I'm gonna have to wait until Friday, and I just was spent the entire week just going oh, I got something cool to show off, I got something really cool and nifty to show off, and I'm just, oh, I can't wait to show this off, and there it is. how superb it is. But now that I have this revealed, and before we get into the main show, the main attraction as to why we're here, I do have actually a second new thing to show off, because you just can't stop me. I will keep showing off things as I see fit. And to that end, I have this to show all of you. Take a look at this. I'm busy building the stream while I accommodate your lateness. You know how hard it is to hammer desks? Well, there's I have a very important question for you right now, JB.
Okay.
Tell me, are you enjoying the wine?
Oh God, they're deflating. Were you gonna say something to defend yourself? Remember?
It's my first day. That's right, I got a channel trailer now. And I figure that that's going to be available for people to see if I'm not live and online. That'll be something that shows up on my Twitch page, and also will probably be what I play whenever we get a raid, because that would be neat and nifty to have. But I got that now. I got a Tuck Sprite and I got a channel trailer. So all these things showing that, like, we're moving up. We're moving right along in stuff. We're just, every single day something new is coming along, and to that end, actually, there's still, despite what you might think, wow, they showed off a Talk Sprite and they showed off a channel trailer. Is there anything else that they have to reveal and unveil? Yes, there is. But is it time today for me to unveil that stuff? No. There's more coming along the way, but I'm saving that for a later date. So what we're going to do instead, now that I've shown off all that cool, nifty stuff that was so... yeah, E3 presenter voice. Oh, actually, just one more thing. Except my E3 presentation will go on for weeks. Who knows how long my E3 presentation will go. The people will be trapped in the convention hall. They won't be able to leave. I will supply them with water and food, though, because I am not a cruel person. Let it be said that when I place you under house arrest, I will still provide you with all the amenities you need. Look, you're going to be confined into this convention hall. I'm going to be presenting for a whole bunch of weeks, but I'm not evil. I just have a lot to say. And speaking of having a lot to say, I believe it's time to get into the main crux of why we're here today. Pink Floyd were formed in 1965 in London, England. It was the end result of a bunch of architectural students getting together and deciding that they wanted to form a band. They were a bunch of people studying to be architects, and were also, like most of the late teens, early 20-somethings in London at the time, they were part of the swingin' London scene. They had connections with the mod movement. And then they became sort of the house band of the London Underground. As the 60s got more and more psychedelic, they would play at all of the neat little underground London clubs like the Bag of Nails and the UFO and other places whose names escape me. And then after some trials and personal issues set them back for a couple of years, and after spending a good, 5 to 6 to 7 years, just sort of, simmering in the sort of culty underground of music appreciation, suddenly they burst forth as perhaps the most popular and successful of all the British progressive rock bands of the mid-70s, crafting a series of absolutely iconic concept albums, which are still beloved by many to this very day. Their current status is, to put it bluntly, the current status of Pink Floyd is a group of angry old men bitterly arguing with each other on social media to this very day. I wish that was not the case, but that seems to be, considering recent news of Roger Waters and David Gilmore having it out in the press again, which you'd think after 50 years they would have, I don't know, learned to simmer down a little bit. That seems to be the current state of Pink Floyd. But that, to get into their history is something we will maybe do tangentially today, but I have set myself a task, which is, can I do what I arguably have done once before in doing a tier list of the Beatles albums? And can I be so bold as to take the discography of one of the most popular and well-beloved and successful rock groups of all time, a band whose discography some may consider to be the pinnacle of pop music in the 1970s, and potentially pop music of the 20th century? Can I take those classic albums and put them on a tier list? Can I do it? Well, let's see. Here we have our tier list rankings. We have the main, let's see here. What's the number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We have the main canonical 15 Pink Floyd studio albums. Obviously, we've neglected to include the live records or the very missing the point greatest hits albums. Pink Floyd have put out a great many greatest hits albums, which is astounding considering how they're the most anti-greatest hits kind of group in the world. They did not make singles. I mean, they did at the start, but they're pretty definitively an albums band. If you're listening to Pink Floyd, you're not listening to one song outside of like maybe a couple of records. Now, if you're listening to Pink Floyd, you're going on a 45-minute long journey, or potentially longer. So, to that end, though, let us begin this discography ranking. We're going to be rating this as is typical of tier list rankings. We've got our S rank, we've got our A, B, C, and D rank. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I'm going to just do, what is it, this. And no, I didn't want to change that. I wanted to keep that as it was. Hang on. Okay, and then add a row below. There we go. So, and this shall be blue, and shall be just, let's not beat around the bush, F. Because there are F tier Pink Floyd albums. There are. I don't know if people are brave enough to say that, but I will say it. There are some Pink Floyd albums that are just not very good. And I'm going to get to the bottom of which ones those are. Don't you worry. I'm going to also fix the cropping a little bit. That looks like that's about right. Yeah, let's do this. And do that. And then bop. There we go with that. Okay. So, now with all that being said and done, let us begin at the beginning. 1967, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The Pink Floyd debut album, which I think for most people who just have a passing knowledge of Pink Floyd or a passing appreciation of Pink Floyd, the sound of Piper at the Gates of Dawn might prove a little bit of a surprise to them, because very little of what Pink Floyd will become known and respected for is really here. That being said, that doesn't mean that it is a bad album. It just means that Pink Floyd at the start of their career were an entirely different kind of band than what they grew into. And that's largely the work of the group's leader at the time, the main songwriter and the main vocalist and the frontman, really, of the band, one Syd Barrett. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn is really Sid's crowning masterpiece. There are some Barrett aficionados who may disagree and say that one or two of his solo albums are his real masterpiece, but I think for the vast majority of the music listening audience, I think Piper at the Gates of Dawn stands as the Syd Barrett album of Pink Floyd, and honestly, the definitive portrait of Syd Barrett as a performer and a songwriter. And it's a pretty good record. I mean, it holds its own for what kind of record it is, which is really, outside of like one or two instrumental psychedelic jams, it really is just a mid-60s pop album. It's a collection of 10 or 12 pop songs that are these sort of English, classic mid-60s English folk songs given a kind of spacey edge, because it's these like sort of acoustic guitar folk songs about, children being read nursery rhymes, like sort of songs about cats and gnomes and scarecrows and people having bikes, and like it's very simplistic and almost sort of like Lewis Carroll-esque. It's a little bit of an Alice in Wonderland kind of record. And I think that the sort of retrospective feel it has, too, cannot be understated. Because I think now the record kind of holds a different kind of edge to it because of Syd Barrett's well-known and notable mental decline after finishing the album, which we will touch upon when we finish ranking this record. But for now, is Piper at the Gates of Dawn, how would it rank? Well, it's hard to say, because to me, Piper at the Gates of Dawn is a fantastic mid-60s British psychedelic pop album. I think it holds its own amongst Sgt. Pepper and amongst The Who Sell Out and amongst work from like the Small Faces and against like Something Else by the Kinks. I think it holds its own. It definitely is better. It holds its own amongst like the Rolling Stones' Between the Buttons, and probably easily outranks their Satanic Majesty's Request. It holds its own amongst the competition of the time. But is it really a masterpiece of Pink Floyd's discography? There lies the big question, because it really is not the kind of Pink Floyd that everyone is looking for. I think the baseline music listener, when they think of Pink Floyd, they are thinking of a different band than the band that Pink Floyd were on Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I'm not saying that either iteration is better or worse. In fact, I might say that my lone Pink Floyd hot take is that I would argue that probably the Barrett lineup of Pink Floyd was perhaps one of the most like fantastic lineups that really one can only wish that they could have gone on to do a lot more than just the one album that they delivered. That being said, even of that time period, I don't even think Piper at the Gates of Dawn has the best material that the Syd Barrett lineup of Pink Floyd recorded. Two of the most classic songs of early Pink Floyd, which is Arnold Lane and the iconic See Emily Play. See Emily Play, which became like one of the greatest mid-60s psychedelic singles of all time, not present on the album. A common tradition in Britain during the 60s, as most groups of the period did not like including their hit singles with their albums, as they felt that was kind of a con to the record-buying public. But I do think that not having those singles on the album, like Arnold Lane and especially See Emily Play, I think not having See Emily Play on that album really kind of hurts it. And even then, there are moments on Piper at the Gates of Dawn that aren't necessarily too interesting. The instrumental Pow R Talk H, I think is how it's pronounced. Not one of the most exciting pieces. And even for as good and as like high quality as the majority of Syd Barrett's writing is on the record, he has a couple of duff tracks here and there. I don't think Chapter 24 is one of the most exciting pieces of music. Lucifer Sam is just kind of acceptable. And Roger Waters' lone contribution, Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, I preferred the name of the song rather than what it actually is. But then also, you have great stuff on that record, like Astronomy Domine, Matilda Mother, the closing track, Bike, Flaming, The Scarecrow. There's a lot of really good stuff. So I think, all things considered, if we were judging Piper at the Gates of Dawn just as the kind of... If we were judging Piper at the Gates of Dawn as... Whoops, that's not its ranking. If we were judging Piper at the Gates of Dawn as just a British psychedelic 60s album, and even one of the albums of just 1967... S tier, definitely, I would say. I think it's one of the best albums of 1967 and one of the best albums of the British psychedelic period. But in terms of Pink Floyd's actual discography, I think it probably sits comfortably in the A rank. I think it's easily an A+, but in terms of it being an actual S tier category, that might be pushing it a little bit. That might be a little bit of a sort of hipster outlook to have, of putting Piper at the Gates of Dawn and S tier. I think Pink Floyd went on to do much more iconic and influential work than what's on Piper at the Gates of Dawn. But that's not to denigrate the high quality that Piper at the Gates of Dawn is. It's supremely good, and I would easily recommend it to anyone. It's one of my favorite albums of that period of music. But in terms of the grander scope of Pink Floyd's discography, I think it sits comfortably in the A rank. Piper at the Gates of Dawn was followed up in 1968 by A Saucerful of Secrets, which, on the whole, Saucerful of Secrets is a transitional album for Pink Floyd, in more ways than one. It's the only album in Pink Floyd's discography that features all 5 members of the band. And this is because during its recording, Syd Barrett, who had been the creative driving force of the band, had started taking much too much LSD and seemed to be shying away from trying to be the big pop idol on Top of the Pops and racking up all the major hits on the radio. He was withdrawing away from that, and his behavior in social occasions and on stage became increasingly more and more erratic and self-destructive, to the point that the other members of Pink Floyd sort of said, well, we can't go on like this just isn't working. We're going to need to, if we're going to keep going, we need to bring in someone else. And to that end, they brought in David Gilmore. Initially, the plan, I think, was that Syd Barrett would stay at home and write singles a la Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, and David Gilmore would learn all of Syd's parts and go out and do the tours. And then after about a month of that being the situation, the decision was made, no, we're going to move on without Syd. We're just going to move on. We don't know how to put up with him and his erratic behavior. We're just going to push forward. Hello, Chaucella. And so, Saucerful of Secrets ends up being a transitional record because it moves we get glimpses of Pink Floyd as the Syd Barrett lineup, particularly with the closing track of Jug Band Blues, which is Syd's final contribution to the Floyd. And interesting from a sort of historical aspect, it's not as catchy and as uplifting and imaginative as the material he has on Piper at the Gates of Dawn. It's a bit more sardonic, it's a bit more ironic, and a bit more sinister, and a reflection of where the composer was mentally at that point in his life. The rest of the album is really given over to contributions from practically every member of the band, I think, outside of David Gilmore, who's on here primarily as just a guitar player and a singer. But we get really the start of Roger Waters coming to the fore as the primary creative director of the band. We get some songs from Rick Wright, the keyboard player, and I think practically every single member of the band takes the lead vocal role at one point, including Nick Mason on the early first attempt at Roger Waters critiquing the military-industrial complex in the novelty track Corporal Clegg. We get a little bit of Nick Mason singing on that track. But the main feature of Saucerful of Secrets, if Piper at the Gates of Dawn's main feature was its concise, fantastic, mid-60s psychedelic pop songs, Saucerful of Secrets is where things start to get more spacey and ambient and instrumental, particularly in the sort of soft, simmering boil of Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun and the 11-minute long title track, Saucerful of Secrets. It's the start of Pink Floyd sort of going like, okay, well, we can't really, outside of Sid, we are not really that great at writing pop songs. We don't really know how to do that, but we know how to, like, we're good at mood. We're good mood makers. We can, like, sort of stretch out and do some ambient instrumentalism and sort of keep the psychedelic sound going a little bit, but turn it into more of a spacey, ambient, sort of floating, dreamy sound. And that's really, if Piper at the Gates of Dawn is Syd Barrett's Spotlight album, I think Saucerful of Secrets is really the debut of the Pink Floyd that everyone, like, knows now. I think the real start of Pink Floyd as the band that people know them as today starts with Saucerful of Secrets. But that said, even at its best, I don't think Saucerful of Secrets really tops anything that's on Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I don't think Saucerful of Secrets at its best really even tops the worst of Piper at the Gates of Dawn. There's maybe a couple of moments here and there that rank alongside some of the more filler tracks on Piper. But I think for the most part, Saucerful of Secrets, it is significant from a historical aspect, and it's significant in terms of what it represents for the band that created it. But for our tier list, I think it's a solid B. I think it's a good listen, but I think it's also not necessarily the most... It's not a revelation. There was certainly... And it definitely wasn't something that, like, blew the doors wide open and had a major impact on the rest of the competition for when it came out. In reality, I would say that what we're going to be seeing with the next couple entries is Pink Floyd trying to figure out what to do after making, like, one of the most classic psychedelic albums of all time, as the music scene swiftly moves away from psychedelics into sort of hard rock and folk rock and singer-songwriter stuff, and just moves into a different direction than, like, spacey instrumentals. Or I should say spacey psychedelics instrumentals. After Saucerful of Secrets, we start getting into sort of erratic territory with the discography. The next album from Pink Floyd to follow on from Saucerful of Secrets is the soundtrack to the film More, which I believe was it was either a French or an Italian film, and it was called More, and it was directed by a director, I believe the name was Barbara Schroeder. I could be wrong about that, and I could have mispronounced it too. I haven't seen this movie. I have a copy of it, but I haven't seen it. I've never bothered to watch it, which I guess is just on me. But More is really, it's what the full title kind of says it is. It's a soundtrack album. And it's a soundtrack album for an elusive European art house movie. There's some interesting pieces on the record. I like Cymbeline. I think that's a great track. But and I like Green is the Color. And there's sort of a sick fascination I have with songs like the Nile Song and Ibiza Bar, just because they're like Pink Floyd's attempt at, like, maybe hard rock or metal, but they sound, like, really unsure and tired as they play it. Chaucella is kind of on the ball here. It's a filler record, and I think most people kind of view it as a filler record. I think there are one or two interesting pieces on it, but I think for the most part, the most interesting Pink Floyd piece of that period was the non-album B-side Careful With That Axe Eugene, which is not featured on this album. And in terms of the Pink Floyd orbit, I think the most interesting stuff to come out of this era of time was the stuff on Syd Barrett's first solo album, The Madcap Laughs. As for More, it's all over the place. It has its moments, but it's definitely meant to be a soundtrack album for a movie. And I think to that end, probably D tier. I think D tier is where it belongs. There's nothing on it I hate. There's some bad stuff on it. There's this one little incidental piece called The Spanish Song that I think kind of borders on some gentle racism here and there. Just a little bit. You've got this like sort of Spanish flamenco guitar playing, and then David Gilmore doing a very questionable impression of like someone of Spanish origin. Not one of their better pieces. I think very, very questionable. Yeah, it's a hard one. I would say probably, yeah, very, very, very yikes. Not a good track. So I'm inclined to put that in. I think the presence of Cymbeline pushes it from F to D to me, because the bad moments on More are pretty bad, but the good moments on it are pretty good. It's almost F tier. It's bordering on F tier. It's I would say, of all the albums of the classic lineup, I think More is probably the weakest. But maybe I'll prove myself wrong, because a couple months after More, we got Umaguma. Umaguma is... how to describe Umaguma? It is half live record and half... let's just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. Let's start with the first half of the record, which is a live record. You have 4 pieces here, which are all very poorly recorded. They're essentially live renditions of Careful With That Axe Eugene, Saucer Full of Secrets, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, and the lone Barrett composition, Astronomy, that I think they were keeping around from that period, Astronomy Domine. If you want a glimpse at what Pink Floyd at the turn of the decade were like, which was like sort of the kings of space rock, I think it's maybe interesting. But I'm not a fan of any of the live records. Cleaver, thank you for hosting my stream. I hope that you are having fun right now. And, yeah, I think all things considered, the live stuff on Umaguma is interesting for what it represents and what it appears a glimpse into, and for being like the only, in quotes, official live record of the classic Pink Floyd lineup. It's maybe worth it for that, but I think if you want better glimpses of Pink Floyd at their peak live, I would say probably try and track down the movie Live at Pompeii. I think that outside of Astronomy Domine, it features all of the songs featured on that live record, but much more interestingly and excitingly performed. So that's the live half of Umaguma. The second half of Umaguma is essentially a lot of avant-garde recordings done individually by the individual members of Pink Floyd, where essentially each of the 4 members was given like a quarter of a studio record to do whatever it was they wanted to do. And the results vary. I think if I'm remembering the track listing correctly, the first one is Richard Wright, who delivers the 3-part organ piece Sisyphus, which is moderately interesting in like the first couple of minutes. I like its opening. There's sort of down, 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 down. Like that opening theme is very cool and groovy, and I like listening to it. The rest of Sisyphus is a lot of like plonking of piano strings and like people making weird noises and just some very atonal piano playing. It's not it's something that like wears out its welcome fairly quickly. I would say, just in general, it wears out its welcome pretty swiftly. That's followed by, if I remember correctly, Roger Waters, who delivers 2 pieces. One is really good, one is really meh. The first one is Grantchester Meadows, which I think is probably the closest thing to an actual song that's a present from the studio portion of Umaguma. It's definitely, I think, one of the most slept on Pink Floyd tracks. It's got a great guitar riff to it. It's just a nice, gentle, pastoral folk song, played on acoustic guitar with Roger kind of doing this sort of like soft humming vocal and bird song playing throughout the whole thing. It's a nice track. It's a nice little piece. And then that's followed by a little piece, an experimental piece with one of the most ungodly, unwieldy song names that I will ever have the pleasure to say. And I'm even going to type it out here in chat because it's something else. Because I think maybe this might hold the record for the longest song name ever. I could be wrong about that, but so we follow up Grantchester Meadows, which is probably the best moment on the album of Umaguma, with several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pict. Now, there's a title for you. What kind of track do you think you're getting out of that title? Surprise! It's Roger Waters discovering how to sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Essentially, if you would like about 3 to 5 minutes of Roger Waters making random mouth sounds into a microphone and then playing it back at random speeds, there you go. That's several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pict. This basically sums up that piece. And then after that, we get David Gilmore, who delivers us probably the second best moment on the record, which is a 3-parter called The Narrow Way. It takes a while to get going. The first part is just kind of noodling on guitar. The second part's got a really great sinister guitar riff. That is like very minor key. I think it's one of the better guitar riffs of the era, and a lot of people sleep on it. It's this kind of do 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 bow down down down. It's a very sinister like guitar riff, but it's a really good one, and that makes up part 2. And then part 3 is like an actual song. Yeah, Alvin and his boys are the real true actual members of Pink Floyd. Alvin and the intricate arrangements. Indeed. The Narrow Way, it takes a while to get going, but it's a pretty decent track. And then finally we end with Nick Mason's The Grand Vizier's Garden Party, which is essentially just a drum solo. That's all it is. It's a drum solo. It's just it's an 8-minute long drum solo, bookended by flutes. D tier. There's not, I would say, in terms of, there's this period, it's well known amongst like sort of Pink Floyd fans and music aficionados that like there was this stretch between Piper at the Gates of Dawn and then Pink Floyd's like massively successful mid-70s, where they spent this long stretch of time trying to figure out what the fuck they were doing without Syd Barrett. I think the ultimate nadir of their we don't know what to do right now era is probably Umaguma. That being said, there's nothing as like awfully problematic on it as there is on like More. But that being said, there are moments there it's always a bad sign for me if I'm listening to a record and I am like pulling out, I'll listen to it on my phone or whatever, and I will pull out my phone while I'm like listening to the record to see how much longer I have left on a track. I think when you reach that moment where like the listener is actively asking themselves how much longer is this gonna go, you fucked up. You borked it. You didn't do good. You messed up. You didn't do it. So that all being said, I think Umaguma and more, Pink Floyd had a rough 1969, y'all. While everyone else was while the rest of the prog rock bands were starting to like formulate and find their own sound, Pink Floyd were kind of like confused. They didn't really know what to do yet. But they began to get a better glimpse at what they were doing, I would say, with 1970s Adam Hartmover, which I don't know if it fully corresponds with how you're seeing it on stream. Adam Hartmover easily takes the award for one of my most favorite album covers ever. It's just a cow. But look at a cow! If I saw Cow in record store like this, I'd pick that record up, and I would hope you would too. But Adam Hartmover is an interesting record. I don't think the actual band Pink Floyd like it very much. I think they've all kind of grown to despise Adam Hartmover. But I don't agree with that philosophy. I actually think that Adam Hartmover, for the most part, is the start of Pink Floyd's progressive period. I think if Umaguma is like the absolute nadir of them trying to remain psychedelic at the end of the 60s, I think Adam Hartmover is the start of when they start being like, okay, well, what else can we do? And I think the reason why it's sort of slept on is because not all of the experiments work. The main feature of the record is the opening 23-minute long suite, the title track, Adam Hartmover, which is presented as sort of like a progressive rock piece, but its grand feature is that it features an orchestra. There's horns and choirs on it. I believe they were arranged by Bob Ezrin, who will later go on to be notorious for chronically overproducing albums, but I'll get to that eventually. But if it's not Bob Ezrin, then it's James Guthrie. It's one of the two. But and Adam Hartmover's title track is tricky because I think from a compositional effort, it does point the way toward Pink Floyd taking a more progressive edge to their work. That being said, it's notorious for the fact that the actual orchestra and choir that are on the track and like are the main feature sound very bored and disinterested and like they don't want to be there. And they do. And it does kind of hurt that track. That being said, I don't think that Adam Hartmover on its own should stand as a defining characteristic of the record, because the other tracks on Adam Hartmover, specifically the stuff on side 2, I think is, for the most part, pretty good stuff that's like grand Pink Floyd deep cuts that a lot of people sleep on. I love the simplicity of If, the Roger Waters song. Summer 68 is like one of the better late-stage Pink Floyd pop songs that Rick Wright wrote for them. They always struggled to sound pop after Syd Barrett left or was dismissed, but Summer 68, I think, holds its own pretty well. And Fat Old Son from David Gilmore is just, it blossoms from being this like very gentle pastoral folk song into being this like guitar rock anthem, and it's good stuff. It's hard for me to say that like, oh, Adam Hartmover, like, because not all the experiments work, like it would be of a lesser quality. I think honestly the bad rap it gets is because the members of Pink Floyd have grown to not like the record, but I think that's honestly an unfair assessment. I think Adam Hartmover is really the start of Pink Floyd's progressive period, and I think that there's a lot of actually really good stuff on the record if it's given like the appropriate mood and the appropriate appreciation. I'm tempted to put it in B tier, honestly. I don't know if I would put it above or below Saucer Full of Secrets. I think it depends on how much credibility I give to Syd Barrett, honestly, because I think Saucer Full of Secrets and Adam Hartmover, they accompany a similar place in Pink Floyd's discography in that they're transitional records that symbolize the end of something and the start of something else. With Saucerful of Secrets, it represents the end of the psychedelic Barrett era of Pink Floyd, and with Adam Hartmother, it represents the start of their progressive period. But which has the better material? I think in terms of just genuinely numbers, I think from a purely mathematical standpoint, I'm tempted to give the edge to Saucerful of Secrets, because Saucerful of Secrets has on it Let There Be More Light, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, the title track, Saucerful of Secrets, and Jug Band Blues. It has those 4 tracks. Adam Hartmother has it has If, Fat Old Son, and then the title track, I think. And then the other 2 pieces are Summer 68, I think, too. But, the other 2 pieces, the larger pieces, aren't necessarily the grandest stuff. I think I'm going to go and put it below Saucerful of Secrets just because from a baseline standpoint, I think the band themselves are more inclined to enjoy Saucerful of Secrets than Adam Hartmother. And I think purely for that reason, it gets a little bit of the edge over Adam Hartmother. Now, I don't know if I myself personally think that Saucerful of Secrets is a better record than Adam Hartmother. That's a hard ask for me to make, but I think in terms of just generally where we're ranking Pink Floyd's discography in terms of historical relevance, in terms of band appreciation, and in terms of where they are at any given moment, I think probably Saucerful is a bit more of a unified record than Adam Hartmother. But we follow that up with, if Adam Hartmother is the start of Pink Floyd being a prog band, Metal from 1971, I think, is the start of people really sort of saying this is the start of Pink Floyd's classic period, I think. It's, let's just get straight into it. Echoes, 23 minutes long, really the debut of the classic Pink Floyd sound. It's still working, the majority of Metal is still working within somewhat of the psychedelic flavor that the earlier records were working in, but it's a bit more streamlined and mainstreamed, I guess is the word for it. It was still not a huge seller when it came out, at least I don't think so. But the best moments of Metal are very, very good, and they do point toward the start of Pink Floyd's classic sound. And Echoes is easily the greatest manifestation of it. But then also beyond Echoes, you have the opening One of These Days instrumental with that great staccato bass sound that I absolutely love, and I have wanted to try and replicate that for ages. You have a song like Fearless, which is a very nice album deep cut. But there's also filler on it too. There's stuff like Seamus, which is not necessarily the most exciting thing. It's a bit of a... Seamus is honestly kind of a bit of a turn to the era of Umaguma and the sound of that. Pillow of Winds is fine. It's not really that mind-blowing. And Saint-Tropez is simply acceptable. I think because of it bookending itself with One of These Days and Echoes, it's probably... I think Echoes alone puts it in A tier, honestly. It's not above Piper at the Gates of Dawn by any stretch of the imagination. I've seen people debate that, mind you. I've seen a couple of people do their rankings of Pink Floyd, and they put Metal above Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Hard to disagree on that one. I don't think that that's correct at all. To me, Metal is definitely, it's the start of Pink Floyd's classic period, but I don't know if it's necessarily outside of like a couple of like really, really pieces, I don't know if it's like the best album of Pink Floyd's. Now, it's interesting to me how history kind of rewrites itself. Nowadays, whenever I see Pink Floyd documentaries or, you know, artist write-ups and appreciations, normally the classic thing people do is they go straight from metal into Dark Side of the Moon. But that's not the case. I think maybe in terms of how the band perceived their own career and their own artistic trajectory, maybe to them it's straight from metal into Dark Side. But in terms of actual reality and how things played themselves out, in between metal and Dark Side of the Moon, we got 1972's Obscured by Clouds, which once again was another soundtrack album to a Barbara Schroeder film. This one was called La Vallée, and like More, I have not seen it. I own it, but I have not seen it. I think in terms generally as like the pieces of music that are on here, I think between the two soundtrack albums, if it's down to More and Obscured by Clouds just in general has much better material. There's nothing on it that's like very bad. There's a couple things on it that aren't very good, but like I think for the most part, a lot of what's on Obscured by Clouds is pretty decent stuff. Burning Bridges is pretty good. Childhood's End is pretty superb. Free 4 is pretty superb. The Gold is a great rockin' number. What's the Deal is pretty gorgeous. Stay is all right. And then the instrumental tracks are just the instrumental tracks. I think in terms of like showing Pink Floyd going from like the folk act that they are on Atom Heart Mother and even parts of metal, Obscured by Clouds is when they start to get a bit more meat on the bones. There's a bit more of a harder rock edge to Obscured by Clouds. But also, it's not that particularly earth-shattering a listen. And for as much good as there is on Obscured by Clouds that I think is very, very good, it's also, on the face, pretty generic. I would say it's possibly the most generic sounding of all the Pink Floyd records. Because there's really nothing on it that like irritates me like it does on Umaguma, or like just is absolutely a band bereft of ideas like on More, I'm inclined to put it in the C tier. I think that might be overselling it to some people, because I've had this discussion a couple of times with some fellow friends who are also Pink Floyd fans, such as I, who feel that I rate Obscured by Clouds too highly. And I think that potentially might be the case. I'm willing to admit my own critical subjectivity here. But all that being said, still, I think that Obscured by Clouds has got... It's decent. I don't think it's great. I think it's good. But I also think it's pretty, on the whole, it's faceless. It's a faceless Pink Floyd album. All things considered. It's pretty generic in what it delivers. And now, now comes the tricky bit, everyone. Because here's the thing. The first 7 albums of Pink Floyd, that I was like, okay, I can rank those. I can rank the first 7 albums pretty well. But the next 4 albums are considered some of the greatest albums ever made by anyone in any field. So it's hard because it's gonna be like comparing, at times it's gonna be like comparing the Mona Lisa to like the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Fucking, how do you compare those? Like, it's hard, you know? So this is gonna be interesting. And considering the first of these four is like one of the highest selling albums ever made, the band are not making my job easy. Okay. What the fuck do you say about the Dark Side of the Moon that hasn't already been said by everyone? I mean, at this point, even the album cover is like, oh, Violet. Oh, Violet. How dare you ask that of me? Shit. I'll tell you okay. Well, first things first, let's get this out of the way. I can tell you what my least favorite song on Dark Side of the Moon is. I don't think I'm going to be saying anything controversial when I say least favorite song on Dark Side of the Moon, Any Color You Like. Total filler. Total filler of a track. Okay. What can you say about Dark Side of the Moon? Okay. Well, honestly, I will say, I think I kind of danced around what I will say about Dark Side of the Moon as a personal subjective listener. I don't think Dark Side of the Moon is a perfect album. I don't think it's like the greatest album ever made. I think it probably is in the top tier of great albums. I think it's, for what it is, I think it pretty much aces everything it tries to achieve. But I don't think it's perfect, and I think that there are a couple of moments of filler on the record. That is a very, very apt description, Chaucella. It is the Sgt. Pepper of Pink Floyd. Your personal favorite is Time. Yeah. Well, I will say that. Okay, so I didn't say what my favorite is. Money was the first song I heard off the album because it's like a classic rock staple, and Money was the first thing I learned to play on the bass. I think Money, I'm going to be quoting from the Rolling Stone editor David Frick here, who was quoted as saying that the great thing about Money is that it's a song about success, and it became what it set out to describe. I do think that adds to the element of Money. Time is a really, really good one. I will say what has wrecked Time, personally for me, is that I had multiple... It's a bit overplayed. Money's a bit overplayed. I will say my issue with Time is that I had multiple high school and even middle school English classes where the teachers, trying to be hip and relevant, would play Time as an example of poetry in rock music. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Any teacher who used Time as an example of poetry in grand literature, pretty fucking pedestrian. Yeah, pretty fucking pedestrian. It was that and Simon and Garfunkel's I Am a Rock, which we'll get into that another day, another time. But having to dissect the lyrics of Time as poetry in school, when you do one read over of the lyrics of Time and it's pretty fucking obvious what it's about and what it represents. I don't feel a grand necessity to yeah, really. Time got wrecked a bit for me because of that. I will say it would be, the question here, ultimately, here's the thing. The issue, I think, there's multiple issues. I think the issue that plagues me at this current moment is that, do I go for the obvious and put Dark Side in S tier? do I do what everyone's already done, or do I try to be like more cool and hip and be like, actually, fuck that, it's F tier. Like, what? At the end of the day, like, I can't lie. I'm not gonna lie and say that like Dark Side of the Moon is not one of the most superb records ever made. I do agree with the analogy that was made a bit earlier by Chaucella, in that it's the Sgt. Pepper of Pink Floyd. I agree with that on multiple levels, in so much that I think Sgt. Pepper was very significant for what it did to the record industry, but I don't think it's the best Beatles album. And simultaneously, I think Dark Side of the Moon supremely good for what it did to, or good is an objective term. I think, okay, here's what I'm going to say about Dark Side of the Moon before I give it my final ranking. Dark Side of the Moon, to me, is the apex of Pink Floyd working as a collaborative unit. Unlike Sgt. Pepper, which I will maintain, Sgt. Pepper to me is now and forever, it's a Paul McCartney album more than a Beatles album. Dark Side of the Moon is a Pink Floyd album. It is easily, of the classic lineup of Waters, Gilmore, Wright, and Mason, I think that it is their absolute apex as a unified unit of four people working together and trying to make something good. I think what we're going to be seeing after this is a constant quarreling for creative control and like sort of band like control. There's going to be a question of leadership that just grows ever more increasing and vicious after Dark Side of the Moon. So, to that end, I mean, it's S tier. It's S tier. I think the one thing that Dark Side has over Sgt. Pepper is that it is more of a band effort than Sgt. Pepper, which is more of a McCartney effort. Dark Side is the work of all four members of the band working at their absolute peak of being like actually friends with each other and wanting to make something good. From here on out, though, it's going to be different battling opinions on what's the right approach, what's the wrong approach, and just a constant unraveling of the fabric of Pink Floyd as a working unit than what they were at the beginning. And to that end, we get 1975's Wish You Were Here, which is a very interesting record in so much that I think amongst the band, certainly I think amongst, I know it's been quoted as saying that it was Rick Wright's favorite album, and I can see why. I don't know if it's necessarily Roger Waters' favorite Pink Floyd album, and I don't know if it's David Gilmour or Nick Mason's favorite album. But that being said, Wish You Were Here is pretty solid. It is definitely a reflection of Pink Floyd now lacking incentive to continue on. I do agree with Violet's assertion that there are no misses on Wish You Were Here. I think the closest maybe you get to a miss on Wish You Were Here is Have a Cigar, which I love that song. It's a novelty track. It's a satire track. I think I once said on Twitter that the difference between a group like The Doors and the difference between a group like Pink Floyd is that whereas The Doors took their like pretentiousness as like utter serious, look how amazing we are, Pink Floyd were quick to undercut their pretentiousness with humor, and people debated me on that. They were like, no, when were Pink Floyd ever funny? And I'm like, look, I'm not saying that they're funny, but they were satirical, and Have a Cigar is very, very clearly satirical. It's a joke novelty track that comes in the middle of the record. It's just they play it seriously, so you don't recognize it as a novelty track, but it is a novelty track. Between that, though, You have Welcome to the Machine, which is utterly vicious and brutal. The amount of like really cool, chilly, sinister synths like and programmed like machines going on during that record is really like overpowering. Wish You Were Here is like what the song like what even can I say about Wish You Were Here, the song? It's like become a staple of rock radio and is a gorgeous piece of music. And then you have bookended around that possibly the band's magnum opus in terms of songs, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is a beautiful tribute to Syd Barrett and just an absolute fantastic, gorgeous piece. It's their longest piece too, but it doesn't feel lengthy. It doesn't feel like 26 minutes when you listen to it back to back, which I have done. It's hard to say. I think Wish You Were Here is probably amongst fans. I think it's pretty frequent that Wish You Were Here is like the fan favorite record. I have to say it's hard for me to make a call because okay, well, for one thing, I'm going to say preemptively, it's likely S tier again. I recognize that I'm doing the obvious thing and putting the obvious records in the S tier, but I'm not here to be, like, controversial or contrarian. I'm here to speak the truth. I think Wish You Were Here is easily an S tier record. Do I think it's better than Dark Side of the Moon? Tricky call. I think potentially yes, but if I'm if I'm trying to put my own critical subjectivity on the back burner and really discuss which of these two albums was the most influential and like set the standard that everyone else followed, there's no question more people were influenced by Dark Side of the Moon than Wish You Were Here. But Wish You Were Here is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's very warm. It's very, despite it coming from like a very conflicted and cold and tense period of the band's history, it's one of their like warmest sounding records. It's a very comforting listen, even though it still retains the same kind of melancholy that the rest of the Pink Floyd discography maintains. Wish You Were Here is if Magical Mystery Tour was structured as an album. It was overshadowed by Dark Side. If I'm trying to equate Pink Floyd discography to Beatles discography, which is tricky considering how usually if I'm equating Pink Floyd to the Beatles, it's basically, do I think Piper at the Gates of Dawn is a better album than Sgt. Pepper? And just between us here on chat, I do. I think Piper at the Gates of Dawn is a much, much better album than Sgt. Pepper. But I don't know if it you know what? Here's the thing, Josh Larry. If there is a Magical Mystery Tour record in Pink Floyd's discography, I know what it is, and we're about to get to it. That being said, I don't think it's Wish You Were Here. And I do think Wish You Were Here is S tier. Can I put it above Dark Side of the Moon in good conscience? No. I think saying Wish You Were Here is better than Dark Side of the Moon is that kind of like, oh, well, Dark Side of the Moon, so overplayed, so overrated, can't believe. I am inclined to agree, but I also can't deny that I think in terms of what it did to music as a whole, I think and also in terms of really what it means to Pink Floyd, I think Wish You Were Here, it's a continuum. Wish You Were Here is a continuum of the sound of Dark Side of the Moon. It's different than Dark Side of the Moon, but it's a continuum of a momentum. It doesn't go further than Dark Side of the Moon. It just is on the same equal level as that record, really. Now, if we're talking Pink Floyd albums that are like Magical Mystery Tour scrapbooks of different stuff, let's get into animals. I'm about to make a very apt pun. Animals, the black sheep of Pink Floyd's classic period. Look, I think Animals is the Pink Floyd album I have perhaps the most hot takes about. Because Animals to me it's a nice record to listen to, and I think most of what's on Animals is pretty good classic Pink Floyd stuff. But, and this is where I'm going to get a bit testy, I think, I find Animals to be, in its concept and execution, I think Animals is a very hypocritical album. The concept of Dark Side of the Moon was, here's the main, features of modern capitalistic society and how it contributes to people being treated as us and them, how it fuels the us and them of society, and how it can sometimes cause people to withdraw inwards and go just completely into themselves and lack any sense of purpose or meaning. Wish You Were Here is a dark rumination of the music industry and also a bittersweet, melancholic reflection on the tragedy of Syd Barrett. Animals' concept is Roger Waters read Animal Farm and went, look, it's simple. We're dogs, sheep, and pigs. The pigs are the upper class, obviously. Cleaver, you've redeemed hat time. Hang on. And take a drink. Okay. Well, first things first, I have to go collect the hat. I'll be right back, y'all. It's time to stretch too. Goodness gracious me. Okay, little brief intermission before we get into it. Here, I'll be right back. Fickle friend, you were my brother once, but I swear never again. You're a chameleon. You are a fake and fickle friend. You were my brother once, but I swear never again. When you reach the end without... Okay, I'm back. And because I haven't properly formatted this yet, thank you very much, Cleaver. Hat time. Woo! It's hat time. Now it's webcam stream. Woo. I wanted to show off my wonderful Talk Sprite, Cleaver, but now you want me to see here's hat. It's hat time. Fantastic. Wonderful hat time. And now that hat time is fulfilled, and I also took a drink. Hey, I'll do it again. And time to stretch. There we go. That's hat time. Anyway, back to this. So, anyway. My. Now then, where were we? Yes, I was about to say my issues with Animals as an album and as a concept. Basically, main gist of the problem I have with Animals is I always will get frustrated when people who become rich and powerful through using capitalistic means then bitch about it. And I say this as a socialist. I get annoyed because I'm like, well, you can bitch and moan, but you have the money. Why don't you start being more socialist and not being part of the 1%? And that's my frustration with Animals, is that Roger Waters goes, okay, the upper class are pigs, the working class are sheep, and the middle business class are vengeful, ready to pounce dogs. But, Roger Waters is a dog who became a pig. Like, he was middle class. He went to, British public school, which is different than American public school. British public school is like boarding school, and then he went and got his like college education, and then like I'm just and then he became rich and famous, and then he's saying ha 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 charade you are, but you're a charade, man. I have issues with Roger Waters sometimes. That being said, like, and also getting into the thing that Chaucella pointed out earlier in terms of Pink Floyd making a Magical Mystery Tour album, the music of Animals 2 is recycled stuff from Wish You Were Here. There's 4 tracks on Animals, technically 5, but one is just one song split into 2. There's 2 songs which are new and original, and that's Pigs on the Wing and Pigs 3 different ones. And then there's Dogs and Sheep, which are rewritten versions of songs You've Gotta Be Crazy and Raving and Drooling, which were written in 1974 in between Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. So, and they're like 2 of the longest tracks on the record. So the majority of Animals is taken up by discarded material from Wish You Were Here. So that makes Animals, to me, the Magical Mystery Tour of the Pink Floyd discography. I have seen people in recent years say that Animals is better than Metal and better than Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that musically it's very interesting, and I think it's still classic Pink Floyd and up there with the best of Pink Floyd. But lyrically, I think it's pretty... Cleaver, what do you think this stream is? Cleaver, what do you think I've been doing now for the past, like, hour and a half? This whole thing is music talk. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. Okay. Let's just... All right. We're doing music... Okay, let's do it again. Gotta do this whole stream over. Whoa. No, I'm not doing that. I have things to do, Cleaver. I have fun stuff that I want to... Well, unless it's over, which I look on Discord and I think it might be over. Oh, well. So then, I don't know. I could do this again. I could do this twice. Oh, well. I'm gonna stretch again. Okay, so, let's see here. Where was I? You're still doing the things? Well, I'll try to join you in the things later, and we'll see if things recommence. Anyway, basic gist of what I was saying. I don't know. Now that I've been thrown off my rhythm, I'm just gonna... It's here. To me, it's not as good as Metal to me. I think Metal is more of a collaborative effort. I think Piper at the Gates of Dawn is a better record than both of them. I've seen people now say that Animals is like up here. I've seen people now say that Animals is a better album than like our next entry, and I wholeheartedly disagree with that assessment. I don't agree with that whatsoever. So, like, to me, Animals, I like it. I've grown to like it more. When I first heard Animals, I thought it was bullshit, and now, after many more listens, I've grown to appreciate it as a record. But do I think it's one of the best realized Pink Floyd concepts? No. And like, I just... It's gotten retrospectively overpraised now, I feel, which a couple of Pink Floyd albums have, but still. It's definitely... It's a good record, but I don't think it's one of their best. Of the classic period, I think it's the least for a reason. Which then follows into The Wall. Now, if we're talking totally subjectively, if I'm being 100% totally subjective in this tier list, The Wall is my favorite Pink Floyd album. I prefer it to Dark Side of the Moon because I think its concept has more layers to it. I think it tells a better story. Making me compliment myself. I think I'm very well knowledged on music from a certain era, specifically music from 1956 to 1994. I think I have a pretty good, expertise and knowledge and scholarly study of all that stuff, and I think that that's played into how I'm able to do streams like this one. So thank you very much for that, Cleaver. Now, anyway, as I was saying, The Wall is my personal favorite Pink Floyd album. It's the album that got me into Pink Floyd more so even than Dark Side of the Moon. I've seen the movie. I have seen it performed live by Roger Waters at the turn of the 2010s. I think that on the whole, from a conceptual aspect, I think it's a better realized concept album than Dark Side of the Moon. I think the high moments on The Wall, like Comfortably Numb and Another Brick in the Wall and Hey You, I think are much higher than anything that is on Dark Side of the Moon. And I think that in terms of like a song-by-song basis, I think The Wall has better material on it. That being said, is it the best Pink Floyd album? Tricky. I think that's going to depend on who you ask, really. Because it is my favorite. But at the same time, and this is why Dark Side of the Moon got such its high placement. Okay, I'm going to take a drink now, too. Cleaver out here causing chaos in my chat. She's been racking up them lemons. And I got to take a drink again. My goodness. All y'all racking up them lemons and throwing them at me like this? Oh, my goodness. Well, anyway. Okay, point. I had a point to this. I think, while The Wall is my favorite Pink Floyd album, it is not Pink Floyd at their most cohesive, or their most collaborative, or their most democratic. Ironically enough, for an album written by a guy who's decrying capitalism and the war machine, by this point in Pink Floyd's history, Roger Waters is becoming kind of pretty much a dictator of the group and its future and its legacy. That is very apt, Chaucella. I would say that's very true. The Wall is the White Album of Pink Floyd, and the White Album is my favorite Beatles album, so it makes sense as to why The Wall would be my favorite Pink Floyd album, if we're making that comparison. I think that it goes in... Ooh, people might get mad at me for this. I don't know. Maybe it's too obvious. Maybe the chat has different feelings. But I am gonna actually put it above Wish You Were Here. Ooh. That's a tricky thing. That's a tricky thing for me to say, even, because I don't know if that's necessarily true, even. But yet, by the same token, I do think that for most people, when they're thinking of Pink Floyd, and I'm not talking about Pink Floyd fans, I'm talking the general radio listener, record buyer. When people are thinking of Pink Floyd, they're thinking of either Dark Side of the Moon or they're thinking of The Wall. And I think what The Wall has on it is some of the greatest moments of Pink Floyd's entire discography. Comfortably Numb is an anthem. Another Brick in the Wall is a schoolyard anthem. And like, there's also just like really, there's like so many elements to The Wall too that like are very much about both its time and place and yet still like maintain relevancy now. Like, it's about the alienation of the school system and about smothering parenting and about how, like, war can destroy homes and families and is fueled by shady people for shady ends, and about how self-destructive behavior and misuse of power, or the mishandling of power, can warp people into vicious, cold-hearted monsters that they are the opposite of what they want to be. I'm going to stretch again. Thank you. I hope this doesn't break my spine. I think The Wall is interesting in that it's a very, very personal record, and yet it is simultaneously, I think, it's the dual piece. Actually, here's the... You know what? As I talk about this... You're making me drink again. As I talk about this, and as I think on it, and as I think about the record as a whole, I'm actually talking myself out of its placement. Because, here's the thing. Violet brought up a very good point earlier, which is that Wish You Were Here has practically no misses. The Wall has some misses. There's some very boring things on The Wall. A lot of side 3 of the album. I'm talking about the stretch of Nobody Home, Vera, and Bring the Boys Back Home. I think, while I don't disagree with the messaging of those tracks, I think they halt the story dead in its tracks. I think they're Roger Waters solo songs that have nothing to do with Pink Floyd, and I think that they're very, very boring and dull, and I think they deflate the flow of the album, which is not something that Wish You Were Here has. So, as I think about it and as I talk about it, I am pushing The Wall into the 3rd slot. I think that it is... I will maintain. I think that The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon are the 2 albums that most people think of when they think of Pink Floyd. But I will maintain The Wall is my favorite Pink Floyd album. But it also has some faltering moments on it that I think are pretty hefty spots of not fantastic that wreck it. But still, that being said, it's obviously S tier. So there went the hard portion of this stream. The one where I had to take 4 of the most cherished and beloved records of one of the most cherished and beloved bands of all time and then rank them. That was hard. Luckily for me, I think that the final 4 we have here are kind of easy to rank, pretty much. I think that here's the thing with Pink Floyd. I said this before. The Dark Side of the Moon represents the apex of Pink Floyd actually acting as a band and as a group, and that it was a constant vying and jockeying for power and position from the rest of their career onwards. And it reached its final breaking point on The Wall, because during the recording and the writing of The Wall, Rick Wright, the keyboard player who'd been there from the beginning, quit the band, or was fired, dependent on who you ask. And what we get from the final 4 records is different permutations of Pink Floyd being controlled by 2 distinct personalities. And I think how people judge these following 4 records is going to be purely dependent on which of these 2 men you prefer. Do you prefer the intense, conceptual political lyricism of Roger Waters, or do you prefer the ambient, calm, spacey melodies and instrumentation of David Gilmore? Because that's basically what these final 4 records are. They are, in my opinion, Pink Floyd albums in pretty much name only. from here on out, the rest of this is either Roger Waters with David Gilmore and Nick Mason, or David Gilmore with Rick Wright and Nick Mason, but not Pink Floyd. Just simply a shell. And to that end, we got the final cut, which is considered by many to be not a Pink Floyd album, but a Roger Waters solo album. And I can see why, because it doesn't really play out like a Pink Floyd record. It doesn't have the sound of a Pink Floyd record. It doesn't have the dynamic melody of a Pink Floyd album. It is a series of concise, angry, political rock that's intensely lyrical and intensely conceptual, and is clearly the work of one brain and one brain only, and that is Roger Waters using the other members of Pink Floyd mainly as session musicians for his own concept. Now, I do enjoy parts of the final cut. I think the vast majority of the final cut suffers from the same issue that side 3 of The Wall suffers from, which is that it is not really about like telling a conceptual story or really having the kind of, atmospheric flow of that classic trademark Pink Floyd sound. It's about Roger Waters crafting a very intense, angry portrait of let's face it, Britain during Thatcherism. It's a Thatcher album. It as many protest albums from England of the 80s were, it's Roger Waters' take on the Falkland Islands and Thatcher. And, that will have interest to people who feel like together with the issue, who recognize the issues of Thatcherism, of which there were issues aplenty with Thatcherism. But is it actually a Pink Floyd record? Not really. Is it actually that? Is it a rewarding listen? Yeah, it can be. But is it a Pink Floyd record? No, not really. And will it hold a lot of rewards for people who are looking for the sound of the 3 albums that are at the top of the list there? Not really. By that same token, though, it's the last, Pink Floyd record that has a decent concept that holds itself the way through and acts, in my opinion, really as an album statement. I know one of the following entries in here people will debate me on and say that they would defend it, but, to me, the end of Pink Floyd being a really dynamic albums act is with the final cut. But that being said, I don't think it's a very interesting Pink Floyd album. I don't think it really is a Pink Floyd album. I think it's a Roger Waters solo album. And for that reason, it goes in the C tier. I think it's better than Obscured by Clouds. I think it's more interesting than Obscured by Clouds. But it's just simply, it's not really what you want out of a Pink Floyd album. But you know what also isn't, I think, what you want out of a Pink Floyd album? A momentary lapse of reason. This is the beginning of our current state of Pink Floyd, which is being run by David Gilmore and is heavy on the ambient instrumentals and the slow, brooding vocals, and is defined by a lot of spectacle, a lot of focus on imagery from music videos and album artwork. I think very interesting artwork in music videos, but a lot of spectacle. Not a lot to say in these records. David Gilmore is not that intensely lyrical or thoughtful as a poet as Roger Waters is, nor is his collaborator, Pauly Sampson. To me, this is... if you were asking me to rank, if you said to me, rank the 3 leaders of Pink Floyd, who were the best writers? I would say number 1 is Syd Barrett, because ha ha ha. And number 2 would be Roger Waters, and number 3 would be David Gilmore. I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a fan of the David Gilmore lineup of Pink Floyd. I think that they were important in sustaining a brand. They definitely sustained a brand. But I don't think that they're very exciting records as Pink Floyd records. So let's get right on into it. A Momentary Lapse of Reason is a very 80s album. It is a very 80s rock album. It is a very 80s rock album made by boomers, in so much that it sounds like a bunch of boomers made an 80s album. It's hefty on the drum machines. It's hefty on the programmers. It's lacking in terms of thematic unity and lyrical coherency and concepts that are interesting. It has some good singles. I like Learning to Fly. I think that's a catchy pop song. I think that worked well. But like, to me, I don't know. The worst of Momentary Lapse of Reason for me, it's at its worst, like, Momentary Lapse of Reason is up there with, like, Kokomo for me, you know? It's a very, like, hey, we're still here from the 60s, let's sound like Phil Collins. But, like, not good. Not as good. I am tempted to... Well, let me say this. To me, it's a D tier record. Do I judge it more harshly than the very we don't know what we're doing Umaguma, or the this is a filler soundtrack album more? Which has the better points on it? Which has the better moments? I'm inclined to say, you know what? Maybe I'll talk myself out of this later, but I think at the very least, Momentary Lapse of Reason is not as obnoxious as some of the worst moments on Umaguma. It's D tier. It's an easy D tier listen for me. But it's not like obnoxious as some of the worst bits of Umaguma. But it also is very boring. I find it tremendously dull to listen to. It does not excite me whatsoever. It goes into D tier. And that's followed up by The Division Bell from 1994. Here's the thing. I think The Division Bell is a record that is liked by a lot of Pink Floyd fans. Not I. I don't like it at all, really. I think that by 1994, most of the bands from the 60s and 70s who were sticking around were... If they were doing good, then they were doing good by stripping down and simplifying what it was they were doing and getting a bit back down to basics. Whereas some of the worst acts flew into adult contemporary. Now, The Division Bell is interesting because, like Chaucella says there, it sounds like it's trying to go back to the classic Pink Floyd sound. And I would actually say that, for the most part, it does. I would not deny that I think The Division Bell is a return to the kind of sound of records like Wish You Were Here or Metal. I think that it's within that general area. But there's a thing that's going to be... that the whole thing, the frustration I have with the Gilmore era is that... And actually, with both of the things, the issue I have with Pink Floyd post The Wall is that the two main creative forces of Pink Floyd, Roger Waters and David Gilmour, stopped realizing that, like, what made Pink Floyd at their best fantastic was the blend of, like, really great instrumentation and melody with intense, like, lyrical, thematical concepts. I think one party holds lyrics in too high a regard, and I think the other party holds sound in too high of a regard. And to me, The Division Bell sounds like it should work. It sounds like classic Pink Floyd, but it's lacking in the concept. It doesn't have a very interesting thematic through line. It does a little bit in so much that the album, like, you know, declares that it's about communication. A lot of the songs are about talking and about like people communicating between each other, but like it's just not inspiring to me. And then also you have to figure in too that by that point, like David Gilmore starts bringing back the sort of like long ambient instrumental kind of pieces. Most of the prog bands that had like lived through the 80s by that point had learned to cut back on the long ambient instrumentals. I'm thinking in particular here of people like Rush or Peter Gabriel, like these artists who were like huge in the 70s for their long, intense pieces, and then by the time like the 80s and the 90s rolled around, they were like compacting their stuff now to being like, okay, well, here's really good pop songs that are intensely artistic and complex, but they're still very good pop songs. Pink Floyd is like, okay, well, we're gonna go back to just like long-winded 7-minute long drones of organ or noodling guitar solos, and I've always been a don't bore us, get to the chorus kind of listener. You know, it's why I actually have a love-hate relationship with prog rock, because when prog gets it right, it's very interesting and fun to listen to. But when it's at its worst, it's very bloated and boring, and I think very tiring. For me, I think the Division Bell, for most people, is a return to form for Pink Floyd. To me, it is pretty much as boring as, like, the rest of the other Pink Floyd discography post-1979, and just falling into traps that I just think are... By the early 90s, they should have been, like... If they were going to return to like that classic thing, they should have just like tried to actually really hone in a thematic idea on the lyrics. But David Gilmour wasn't going to do that, and that wasn't the point of the record. The point of the record was for it to just be the sound of three 50-somethings jamming on a houseboat studio and making something sound like the 70s. And it appealed to that crowd, but to me... It's... I like Obscured by Clouds more subjectively, but I think I'm going to place it here in the C tier. It's not as good as the final cut for me, but it's better than Obscured by Clouds. And that, for the longest time, was the Pink Floyd discography. For the most part, after the Division Bell, it was kind of assumed that Pink Floyd broke up. And then suddenly, without warning or want, I think, David Gilmour said a new Pink Floyd album is coming. And then I think I and a lot of other people all kind of went, a new Pink Floyd album? Great. Is Roger back? Endless River is an F. It's an F. Easy fucking F. Why, in 2014, would you make a double album ambient new age record of nothing but outtakes from the Division Bell and all of it being just synths and noodling on guitars? It is all ambient instrumental apart from one song at the end that isn't even that good. Why? In 2014 would you do that? Do you all understand? Do you all understand that every time I would go to a record store and I would peruse the vinyl and I would see the little, because nowadays vinyl's making a comeback, and I would look through the racks of what new vinyl is out there, and without fail there would be piles upon piles of copies of the Endless River that were unsold, because who the fuck wanted this? Who the fuck wanted an ambient Pink Floyd album? Pink Floyd could do long instrumentals and they could do them well, but the point was that there was a concept flowing through it. Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, even Animals. These are all albums that have long instrumental bits to them. But you know what makes them work is that the instrumentals are fulfilling a conceptual, lyrical premise. And without the presence of Roger Waters, there, and without the presence of any vocals or lyrics there for the most part, it's... Oh, Cleaver, you donated 5 subs to the community. Oh, the French. You've gifted a sub to Strel and Nerd Heist and Owl Gravy and Zyot Productions and Chaucella. Oh, we're going to be hearing Orson Welles talk about the French for a little bit here, y'all. Buckle in. But the point that I'm making here, do you have anything to say? I was waiting for Orson to put... Oh, wait. No, you can't hear it. Hang on. We need to... Yeah, hang on. Let's hear Orson. Orson, what do you got to say about all this?
The French.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you, Orson. I think we got one more the French from Orson Welles here. At any moment now.
The French.
There it is. Fantastic. Anyway, thank you, Cleaver Bacon, for being French. No. The Endless River, that's... no one's gonna get mad at me, right? For saying Endless River is an easy F. It's like the worst Pink Floyd album ever. They like David Gilmore waited like 20 years to give us like the worst Pink Floyd album. Does anyone have opposing viewpoints on that? Feel free, anyone who disagrees with me on that statement, to chime in and say, actually, Endless River is not that bad. But to me, all I ever see whenever I go in a record store is just like piles upon piles of unsold copies of The Endless River because no one wants it. No one wanted that album. If Pink Floyd were going to reunite in the 2010s, they should have just finally accepted that, hey, we're all old men now. Let's finally stop arguing with each other and just finally make a good album. And we'll make like a classic album. We'll Dave can do some like music. Dave can cover the music and Roger can write the lyrics like he did. And we'll just make a Pink Floyd album if we're going to reunite after all these years. But no, they're still arguing. And Roger Waters goes on Instagram and talks about how Dave Gilmore has banned him from using the Pink Floyd Facebook account. And he bitterly and angrily posts the liner notes to a remix of Animals that he says David Gilmore's not allowed him to put the liner notes in because even in their 70s, Roger Waters and David Gilmore can still squabble like children, and I wish they would stop and just get their shit together, because really, who's benefiting from that? Not them, not the fan base, not really anyone, really. Nothing's being contributed by that. Anyway, all I have to say is that to me looks like a pretty even keel Pink Floyd tier list. We got Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall in the S tier. Perhaps a bit too obvious of a selection, but I think well-deserved and earned. We have Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Metal, and Animals in the A tier. Again, I think that's probably very, very accurate and just very... That's appropriate. I think that each of those records in the A tier are very essential, very essential listens, but also are not like the best of the band. They're very, very good listens. Saucerful of Secrets and Adam Heart Mother in the B tier. Again, I enjoy those records. They're like, I think, fan favorite records that aren't earth-shattering or anything. They're both transitional efforts, but they serve their purposes pretty well. Final Cut, Division Bell, and Obscured by Clouds in the C tier. That feels correct to me. All three of those records are very mixed bag collections of records. They have their moments of really great brilliance, but then there's also more than a handful of moments that just aren't that interesting. D tier are just the not very good Pink Floyd albums, the Momentary Lapse of Reason, Umaguma, and more. Those are for fans only. If you want to listen to those records, you can, but there's really not that much interesting on them. And The Endless River in the F tier, it's the album that just doesn't need to exist and is more than easy to forget and overlook and ignore and get rid of. And there we go. That's our Pink Floyd tier list. And I think that's probably going to wrap us up for stream today. The current plan of streams in the future is that next Monday I will be continuing on with more Sly 2 Band of Thieves. And that will be happening at 3:30 Eastern Time, as usual. Then I'm going to be taking the rest of that week off because usually my schedule is Mondays and Fridays and then a potential bonus stream on Thursday. However, I have a dentist appointment on Thursday that is going to, I'm certain, leave me in a lot of pain. And I do not want to, I won't be able to stream on Thursday anyway, and I don't think I'll have the energy to stream on Friday because of that either. But then the week after that is going to be more Sly 2 on Monday and probably going back to Legend of Zelda on Friday. And then I can announce this, I think, on Thursday, July the 8th. We're bringing back Ace Attorney. Ace Attorney is coming back, and it's going to be superb and wonderful. Thank you, Chaucella, for making me take a drink. I'm going to do that right now. Here we go. And, again, thank you all so much for being here. Thanks once again to Cleaver for the gift subs. And thank you for the hosting as well. And thank you, Seth, for the hosting. I got to take a drink again. And, again, thank you, Ruby, for the fantastic Talk Sprite, which will now be a regular feature of all the streams. I'm very happy it's here. I hope you like that lovely face, because it's here now. It's going to be doing its thing. And it's time to stretch. We're going to do a raid also, by the way. I'm not thinking I'm going to do any raid phrase. We're going to raid Owl Gravy. They are playing Final Fantasy XIV Online. And that's just what we're going to do. So, I'm going to set up that raid, start that up. Thank you all so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you. Oh, okay. Compliments. Compliments her. Okay. She's a nice lady. That's what I'm gonna say. That's what you get online. Anyway, okay. All right, we're just gonna raid. Say hi to Al for me. I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.